First of all, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Rachel Belmer and I'm the Milwaukee Art Museum's Director of Membership. And I'm so excited to welcome you to today's member art break with Terri White, the museum's Associate Conservator of Objects, and Rick Knight, the museum's framer and mount maker. Today's presentation will focus on one of the museum's most beloved sculptures, Untitled by Robert Gober, a work informally known by many as the suitcase. Terri and Rick will be pulling back the curtain a bit today and sharing a behind-the-scenes look at this incredible work and all that goes into carrying and presenting this unique sculpture. And then our program is going to end today with a little bit of a twist. Rick is going to be on a live feed and will actually be taking us on a little tour of the Gober room. So we're all very excited and in for a treat. But before we get started, I did just want to take a moment to express on behalf of our entire museum team, a big thank you to you, our members. Without your generosity and commitment, so much of what the museum does would not be possible. From exhibitions to caring for artworks in our collection, to the work that we're doing to better serve the diverse populations in our community, you are critical partners in all that we do. So sincerely, we thank you. And then before I turn things over to Terri and Rick, just a few quick notes about today's program format, because it will be a little bit different than some of our past art breaks. You'll see that the chat feature is enabled below, and that's what we'll use to answer any questions that you have at the end of Terri and Rick's presentations. And then my colleague, Amy Kirschke, the museum's Director of Adult, Docent, and School Programs, is going to help facilitate the questions and answers. So please feel free to add your questions throughout the presentations, and then we'll do our best to answer them all at the end. And I know that we did receive a few questions in advance, which is wonderful, so we'll be sure to add those in. And then since we will have the live tour component at the end, and we know you'll have many questions, we are going to forego our usual group discussion at the end so that we can reserve as much time for the Q&A as possible. And then one additional programming note is that for the live tour portion, you'll want to change your display settings to speaker view. That way you'll be able to see Rick's tour on a larger screen. And we'll remind you when the time is to switch that over. And then finally, I did want to make note to watch for an email later this week from Elizabeth Gasparka, who's the museum's development officer for membership. She'll be sharing a few upcoming opportunities that we want to make sure that you're aware of and mark your calendars for. So with that, we are ready to get started, and I'm so pleased to introduce to you our wonderful presenters today, Terri White and Rick Knight. A little bit of a tongue twister. Terri, as Associate Conservator of Objects, has cared for the museum's diverse collection for nearly 3 decades and has looked after the Robert Gober sculpture for over 20 of those years. She specializes in objects, including folk art and sculpture, and is one of very few people on staff who gets to touch the artwork, which she attests, yeah, it's really, really cool. Rick is the framer and mounter at the museum, and he helps ensure that works are safe and shown in their best by building frames and structures that support the objects for display. So with that, I'm so pleased to turn things over to my colleagues.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here as we investigate and explore one of our favorite artworks in the collection. And that, of course, is Robert Gober's Untitled work, affectionately known by the staff as the suitcase. Today, we're going to give you a really rare, unique behind-the-scenes glimpse into the magic that Robert Gober has created with this sculpture. And we're also going to talk about some of the challenges that we face in caring for this piece. So now it's time to pull back the veil and reveal the magician's secrets. But Rick has made me promise to warn you that if you decide to go on this journey with us, you may never look at the sculpture in quite the same way again. After my PowerPoint tour of the Gober sculpture, Rick and Pedro are going to be taking us, as was mentioned, on a really unique live streamed walk through the museum and into the Gober room, sharing some of their stories about the piece and their perspectives. And Rick and Pedro, you guys want to say hello? Okay, great. So let's get started. I'm hoping that many of you have had the chance to see this sculpture when it's been on display in the galleries. And of course, the first thing you're going to notice is the sound of running water. And that is not a sound that you normally expect to hear in a museum, nor do you want to hear that in a museum. So of course it makes you curious, and you turn the corner, and there, just sitting on the gallery floor, is this mysterious suitcase. And as you come closer and you peer in, unexpectedly is the sewer grate. And it's really, you peer through the sewer grate, and it's like a portal into another world. You're looking into this gorgeous sunlit tidal pool. You have colorful sea creatures. There's seaweed sort of wafting in the current. And if you look hard enough, you're going to see someone's feet sort of cooling off in the pool. It's really a very magical and multi-sensory experience. So as you've been returning to the museum, I'm guessing that many of you may have noticed that the Gober sculpture is currently off view. And we've taken this opportunity of the temporary closure earlier in the year to do some minor conservation touch-ups, but really more importantly, to start to strategize for the long-term future of this artwork. And I want to say the long-term survival, and that's sort of a dramatic word, survival, but there's a lot of challenges in caring for this piece. It's got many components, many moving parts, and then add to it, it's been on almost constant display for 20 years. And I hope I'm not spoiling anything when I say it also has running water in it. So this is our moment to make sure that the sculpture is going to be with us for as long as possible. Over on the other side, you see diagram A, labeled diagram A. This is a diagram done by Robert Gober's studio assistant, and it gives you a little peek, a little look ahead as to what we're going to be seeing. And you can see the floor level, the suitcase is sitting on the floor level. And just like the tip of the iceberg, really most of the sculpture is happening below the gallery floor. And that's the part we're going to take you to see today. So if you're ready, let's go on downstairs, and we're going to talk about some of the conservation issues that we deal with this sculpture. Well, that's right, but wait, we're going to take one quick detour back in time. We're going to hop in the DeLorean time machine, and we're going to go back 20 years. What you're looking at here is the original installation of the Gober sculpture with the original loft. And as you're looking at this picture, I'm guessing that you might see a few issues. For example, there's no safety rails. The only way to access this loft was through the ladder that's sort of propped up on the side. And most importantly, there's no sound baffling in this room. Since this was located just off the Decorative Arts Gallery, occasionally we would have sounds wafting up from the Decorative Arts Gallery and sort of spoiling that wonderful serene illusion that Gober spent so much time creating. The other really crazy thing is, in order to fill the pool in this installation, we actually had to roll giant buckets of water through the galleries. And then we had to use a siphon tube, hand siphon the water, and then snake the tube through the sewer grate in order to fill the suitcase. So when it was decided in 2015 that we were going to move the location of this sculpture, we decided to bring in a team of architects to help us design a custom room that would solve for some of these issues. And here are the architectural drawings for the custom designed Gober room, including all kinds of details about the plumbing. I can't make heads or tails of these drawings, but I thought they were impressive looking, and I wanted to include them so that you can see how much care we took in trying to make just the perfect home for this sculpture. Okay, so now we're really going to get to see the Gober room, if you're ready. Over on one side, you see two of our preparators, Art and Paul, are up on that nice secure loft, and that's Joe Kavanaugh on the left, installing the pool onto the loft. And the Gober room was actually built around the pool and the loft. So like it or not, it's in there. We can't get it out unless we would deconstruct the entire room. As you're kind of looking around at the pictures and as you look at that open door, you'll see we've got 6-inch thick walls. It provides incredible soundproofing, which is a good thing because this is actually located in the lower level, very close to the wood shop with the sound of the saws and machinery. And it's also near the preparators' offices, which is sort of the hub for all of the activity that takes place behind the scenes in the lower level. Some of the other interesting features that you can see from these images, the mysterious door on the lower level. I'm going to let Rick show you what's behind door number 2 there a little bit later in your live tour. But my favorite part is that wonderful ladder has treads on it. It has a landing so that clumsy people like me can climb up there and maintain the Gober pool. So if you guys are ready, let's climb the ladder. I promise it's safe. And we'll take a look inside at the tidal pool. And I had to let Robert Gober introduce you, give you the first look of the tidal pool. This image is from his visit in 2004. And here he is very expertly showing us how to install the seaweed for the maximum visual effect when you're looking from above. And the artist has been incredibly helpful over the years that we've had this sculpture on display. Working with us on lighting tracks, components that have broken down. So we really have appreciated his input. On the other side, you see something that you can't see and appreciate when you're viewing this sculpture from the gallery level. And that's the incredible amount of detail that you see cast into the bottom of the pool. Now, I know probably many of you, when you're looking at this, you may think that this sculpture is a collection of found objects that are assembled together. But actually, these are all cast, individually, meticulously painted, and then coated with epoxy. And that's not true of just the pool. Every element, including the suitcase, including the seaweed, all of these things are, and the sewer grate, all of these things are fabricated by the artist. They're not found objects at all. And I think that even though you might not notice this on a conscious level, that having the hand of the artist on these pieces really just gives the sculpture sort of a warmer, more human aspect to it. So now we're going to kind of start talking about the various components that make up the sculpture. And since we're on the pool, we'll just kind of continue here with the pool. I had to include these little snippets of information from a wonderful package of information we got from the artist and the studio, telling us exactly what all these components are and how they're installed. And so you see that it says that it's cast in seamless fiberglass, painted with latex paint, and sealed with 2-part epoxy. And that epoxy is one of the first conservation challenges I'm going to talk to you about. So if you look at the images of the rocks that are sort of in the middle of the screen, you'll see that under the water line is the epoxy has started to yellow. And the top of the rock, that's the original color of the rocks. Well, epoxy yellows. It's true of any epoxy, even a conservation grade epoxy will yellow over time. So this is what we call inherent vice, which basically means there's nothing we can do about it. But the one thing we can do about it is we can tweak the lighting in the Gober room with some cooler temperature lights to try to compensate for that slight yellowing of the epoxy. One other issue that's occurred in the pool, as long as we're talking about our conservation challenges, and that is this whitish haze, which we call bloom. Bloom is something that happens on the surface of epoxies or varnishes, and it can be the result of moisture, solvents, chemicals, such as the algicide that we add to the pool water in order to keep the biological growth at bay. When Rick takes you into the pool and you have a chance to look around a little bit, he'll be able to point out to you those areas of bloom. On the other side, you'll see my test to remove that bloom with a micromesh abrasive, and it was very easy to remove and successful. And so as part of our conservation plan for this work, we'll be removing that bloom layer from the bottom of the pool, but we're also going to be touching up some minor paint losses, some chips, and we're going to be reinforcing that very important marine epoxy layer that keeps this sculpture watertight. Okay, so now when you walk in with Rick and Pedro and you take a look at this room, the first thing you're going to notice are these crazy looking legs. You can see from the drawing, the artist's drawing up there, that they're cast bleached beeswax, and it says with internal wood and metal armatures. Now the wood armature is the cradle that you see behind the legs. The legs slot into that, and then the cradle is actually clamped onto the side of the pool. Then in the bottom of the pool is a specially cast depression so that the feet fit right in there, and we don't have to worry about the legs sliding around inside the pool. This image actually was taken when Rick and I were doing one of our very frequent maintenance cycles of the pool. In order to keep the water quality the way that it needs to be, we about every 3 or 4 months have to empty out the pool, clean the pool, scrub it down, refill it, and add the algicide. So there's a lot of other interesting mechanical things in here, and I'm going to let Rick talk about those things since he is the expert on all things mechanical with the Gober sculpture.
Because the room is soundproof, the sound of the motor was transferring up into the galleries, and it became distracting. You couldn't really hear the water, so we had to come up with a way to baffle the fan noise. And we created this simple little mini soundproof room for the motor. And the lights are an issue. Terri mentioned the cool spectrum, which is really actually closer to sunlight. And that's something we have to monitor quite often because the lights do change color over time. And we want that blue spectrum more than the amber spectrum.
Sorry about that. I'm not going to let you get away without talking a whole lot more about the legs because this is my favorite part of the sculpture. So someone asked ahead of the program a very perceptive question. Whose legs are these? Well, I can tell you, these are Robert Gober's legs. So when you're looking down, that's Robert Gober's, that's the artist's feet cooling off in that tidal pool. And one other really fascinating thing, fascinating to me anyways, the detail image shows you that Robert Gober has taken individual human hairs and inserted each one separately with a hot needle. I mean, this is an unbelievable level of detail. And it's something that, while you might not notice it overtly when you're looking down from above, it really makes a difference. Because when those hairs start to fall out, as you see in the picture below, the action of the water causes those hairs, this is probably about after 15 years, submerged in the pool with the water moving. When the hairs start to fall out, it changes it. It ends up looking just sort of like a chunk of plastic. So I really think that Gober knew what he was doing when he was crafting this illusion. And then the other thing that happens from the moving water, as you can see, is the toenail paint comes off. And so in 2015, we had these legs sent to Gober Studios for repairs. And the picture you're seeing up in the corner is Bill Abbott, and he is working on touching up that paint on the toenails, which I know looks sort of like he's giving a pedicure. And that garish color, believe it or not, it really works. It really works with the image. Now, the last picture, I had to include this just because it's interesting to me. These are 4 wax legs that were cast by the artist, and this is pictures in his studio. And what's interesting to me is that the armature pipes are plastic, whereas ours is copper. And the reason that's interesting is because we had some issues with our copper armature. The copper reacted with water that sort of migrated through microfissures in the wax, and then we ended up with green staining in the wax. And so Gober Studios had to basically dig out that staining, patch it, and then reinsert the hairs. And so we gave that feedback to the artist, and I'm sure other collectors did as well. And the end result is that he changed his fabrication method. And so to me, that's a really great example of how installation art is a somewhat collaborative process. We give feedback to the artist. He makes changes in his methods in order to help this piece last longer. And that's true not only of the legs, but also of many of the other components in the sculpture. For example, the seaweed. Same story. In fact, I don't even think I need to talk about these slides because I think you probably can see what's going on here. The first slide, of course, is what the seaweed looks like before we put it in the pool. And the second slide is about 7 years after that being submerged in that running water. The original seaweed, you can read down here, was made of cast tinted with dye polyurethane. And then a second iteration that the artist tried for us was cast silicone with pigment. But unfortunately, both iterations of the seaweed ended up with the same issues. Once they're in the pool, they start to discolor. Then it starts to degrade, pieces fall off. And eventually that black, it's a lead sinker actually on the bottom. That sinker is what anchors the seaweed to the bottom of the pool so that it can give that appearance of floating in the current. Once that falls off, that piece of seaweed is done. We can't use it in the pool anymore, and we have to replace it. So when you really think about it, the survival of this artwork is going to depend on how successfully we can replace these components as they degrade over time. And the suitcase. As I was mentioning, the suitcase looks like something you might have picked up, in a secondhand store, but it's not. It's fabricated exactly to Gober's specifications, including and right down to the forged hardware and the cast plastic handle. And the picture you're seeing up at the top, this is Bill Abbott again, when he came to Milwaukee to help us with a situation. We had a visitor who leaned against the open suitcase and it bent that metal bracket. So Gober Studio helped us to design a stronger bracket that could withstand force because that suitcase is not meant to close. It doesn't close at all. It's always held in that open position so that people can come and look into it. So here he is taking it apart, and you can kind of see a little bit of the construction of it. And there's a picture of me on the bottom looking really, really happy. And that was because it was a fabulous project to be able to work with Gober Studios on, and I had a great time. One more issue with the suitcase. Because the sculpture is designed for people to walk right up to the suitcase and peer in, what often happens is their shoes will scuff that leather trim and cause it to peel down. So here you see our conservation intern very carefully setting all that lifting leather trim back down with Jade 401 adhesive. And the last thing on this slide is just the little snippet they included for us, information on the drain. And you can see what I mean. It's modeled in clay, cast in bronze, and then that sort of dark distressed patina was added to make it look like it's this old sewer grate. So again, not a found object, a deliberately calculated component of this sculpture. I wanted to show you this other incredible Robert Gober sculpture because it has so much in common with ours. You can see if we think we have a challenge, they actually have 2 tidal pools plus a 3rd water feature in the back that's sort of like a waterfall. But it's really helpful for us to know that there's another sculpture out there like ours so that we can exchange information on how to care for these pieces. And this is Marcus Brecker. He's the conservator at the Schaulager Museum. And he has been incredibly generous sharing information about their sculpture that has helped us decide what we need to do for our piece. And so here you see this incredible underground or under the gallery level room that they have constructed for their sculpture. The pool in front, obviously very, very similar to our pool. Behind him is that 2nd tidal pool. And then off to the side, covered in plexi, that's where the 3rd water feature comes down. They have plumbing systems in here. You can see they have very specialized light tracks and lights that are helping to light the sculpture. But some of the really great information that Kristen shared with us is that they use a reverse osmosis filtration system. And this is a filtration system that takes out particles at the molecular level. So not only the hair, the fibers, and all the other stuff that Rick will be telling you about that falls into the pool, but even those smaller particles that encourage biological growth in the pool and muddy up that nice clear water that we want to keep. And the second very interesting thing that he shared with me was that he was trained by Gober Studio to make repairs on their set of wax legs. So this kind of set off a bell in my head that one way that we can approach the issue with trying to preserve the legs is if we can learn how to do that, document it, so that in the future we can make our own repairs, reinsert those hairs if necessary, touch up that paint on the toenails, and make sure that those legs continue to be a viable part of the sculpture. And so lastly, it takes a team to maintain such an incredible sculpture like the Robert Gober sculpture that we have here in Milwaukee. And these are just a few of the many people that have worked on the sculpture over the years. Up at the top is Diana. She went on to train at the Courtauld Institute, and she's currently a paintings conservator at the Nelson Atkins. And Emily went on to study art education, and she worked at the Milwaukee Art Museum for many years. In the middle there is Julia Day again. She is currently working as a paintings conservator in the Frick Museum in New York. On the side, of course, our own Rick Knight. I could not manage the maintenance and the care of this sculpture without his help. And at the bottom is our intrepid preparator crew. Nothing around here gets done without their very capable assistance. And you're seeing here them actually moving the pool onto that loft level. They had to kind of move this very heavy pool all the way through the museum and into the new Gober room. So now, as we look towards the future, we're assembling another dream team. And it's going to include, and does include, Christian Schneiderman, who's a contemporary objects conservator and a long-term collaborator of Robert Gober. And he is already scheduled now to be working with us, we hope, sometime in early 2022. He is not only successfully negotiated for us to use the seaweed mold so that we can reproduce the seaweed, but he'll also be working on touching up paint losses in the pool and reapplying that very important marine epoxy layer. Also Marcus Brecker, who's been incredibly helpful and generous in sharing information. And most importantly, Robert Gober and his studio, who has worked tirelessly with us over these past 20 plus years to make sure that we can keep this sculpture in its very best condition. And all of this effort by all of these people is really to one goal, and that is to ensure the longest possible lifespan for this amazing sculpture. So I am going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rick and Pedro for a fantastic live stream behind the scene tour, walking through the museum to the Gober room and into the very heart of the sculpture.
Rick and Pedro, I'm just going to jump in here for just a moment. This is Elizabeth Gasparka from the membership team, just chiming in. I just want to remind everyone rather to please switch over to speaker view in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. That will allow you to follow the action. And then on that note, just for those of you among us who may be a little bit sensitive to motion and motion sickness, this view is going to be very dynamic until we get to the Gober room. So please note that they'll be transitioning through the museum behind the scenes. So strap in and be prepared. And with that, I will hand it over to Rick and Pedro.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Terry, thanks. That was great. Before we head down to the Gober pool, I thought I'd give you some bearings and orientation where we are in relation to the rest of the museum and the galleries upstairs. Right now, we're just above, right above us is the Wesselmann's Pabst Blue Ribbon painting. And this is an interesting point in the whole museum because it's the meeting point or conjunction of three different buildings. It's the Saarinen's right over this way, and behind me is the Kaler, and over to this way is the Calatrava. So we're going to head down, but first I'm going to give you a sense of what we're looking at here. This is the frame studio right here, and I'm going to give you a peek into the conservation studio right this way. It's that hi to Terri. Conservation studio. There's Terri. Hey, Terri. All right, let's head on down. There's one feature here I want to take advantage of having your attention is that this is our HVAC system, state-of-the-art, 3-stage air filtration. It's pretty excellent, hospital grade, and great for the artwork and people as well. On down. We're going to be heading down to the operations area. This is our main storage area here. And up ahead is where a lot of the crating and packing take place. This is interesting. This is a in-house designed and built shelving unit that was used for one of our past displays. That's going to be in the museum store. And right ahead here is the preparator suite. It's empty. Good. All right. So the lake is over this way. Right above us here is Cornelia Parker, Edge of England. And now we're going to head in and check out the Gober pool. All right, come on in. All right. There it is. It's a 2-story structure. The pool is above, the mechanicals are down below. Again, this is the other half of our HVAC system. So we're going to look at some of the mechanicals first, then we'll head up. Watch your head. All right. This is the ionized water system, the reverse osmosis that Terri mentioned. It's the same kind of water filtration process used in aquariums and hydroponics. And as she mentioned, it removes all the heavy metals and salts. It's drinkable, but not advised. Your body needs those heavy metals and minerals. This is interesting. These are 2 of the travel mounts that we had to construct to send the legs back to the Gober studio to have refabricated. A lot goes into packing and sending shipping artwork. All right, I'm gonna head up. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Pedro and Rick, it's Elizabeth here. I'm just going to chime in because we're having trouble hearing you.
How's that? Is that better?
It's still very faint.
All right. Yeah, often when we come up to service, how's that, Elizabeth? Is that better?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Often we'll come up during gallery hours and we can hear down through the shaft here, which is probably about 30-something inches. And it goes through a concrete floor that's probably 6 inches. So it's an illusion. And when you look down, you think the floor is that thick, but it's not. One of the comments that we hear often while we're up here is when people look down into the pool, they can't tell if it's an actual pool of water or if it's a video projection, which is kind of interesting. A video projection is a lot easier to maintain, right? Before I point out some of the things that Terri was talking about, I'd like to, let's see, let's go over, one of the things we had to, became an issue unexpectedly, is it creates a vacuum that when the doors are open, all the dust and particles from the gallery actually were sucked down into the pool, which just accelerated its condition in terms of getting dirty quickly. I'm going to point out that the fan here is moved by a motor right behind it, and this is the baffle that we created to muffle the sound of the motor. As we mentioned before, the motor was you could hear it up in the galleries, and it took away from the sound of the water. Often we have this crazy thing here. This is a rheostat that looks like something from 1950s sci-fi. It controls the speed of the fan. This is that amazing pump. Again, 51 gallons per minute for this little thing. That's a lot of water. Part of the maintenance, security will let us know when they see things in the pool, and we retrieve them immediately because it just encourages people dropping things in. But more often than not, it's accidental from people leaning over and looking in, and things fall out of front pockets. This is first I'll show you some of this. This is some of that seaweed. This is the lead weight. Many pairs of sunglasses. Pacifiers, tickets, many name tags. We know who dropped that, right? Some gross things. The toothpick, yucky, and lots of pennies. And this is what we use to retrieve them long distance. One of the most shocking and unsettling things was something that got wrapped up in the fan here. And it was one of those things where you look at it, you couldn't tell what you were looking at. And it turned out it was someone's hair extension. It was quite, I thought it was some sort of creature. Now, let's talk about some of the details as far as what Terry was discussing. But first, I'm going to point this out. This is something we just kind of discovered while we were putting this presentation together, is that the Gober studio, Robert Gober, was very conscious of how you look down and what you see. And he intentionally put the blades back on an incline, a very unnatural way of standing. But what that does, it kind of cuts down on the foreshortening of the figure, so you see more of the legs. You don't even notice it when you're looking down. And we've been in here many times and never really noticed it. But they're on quite an angle, so it gives you, so you can see them better from the top. This area right here is the test area that Terry was talking about right there. And again, some of these shells and that, I assumed that these were actual creatures that were saved, but they're castings. These are created and made by the artist, which is pretty fascinating. And let's see what else we got here. All right. I guess we were a little concerned about showing the behind the scenes, and the idea that it would take away from the enjoyment and the magic of seeing something. But really, it's not that much different than, say, looking at a novel and taking a novel apart and seeing how the writer put it together, or it's behind the scenes of a movie set or a stage set. But I don't know, Pedro, did it take away from this the first time you saw it?
Not if you like good art.
Yeah, there you go. It's a complex piece, and I think it helps to sort of appreciate what the artist does and the kinds of thinking that goes into making something like this. Okay. Elizabeth, are we ready for questions, or?
Yes, it seems like a great moment. Amy, if you wouldn't mind stepping into your MC capacity, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Terry, Rick, and Pedro. This is fantastic. I know we have quite a number of questions. I'm going to start with one that came in advance, which is, how much work did it take to cut a hole in the floor? I know, Terry, you talked about moving the work, which I, for years, gave tours and said this work will never move, and I was proven wrong. So do you want to say something about the process of creating a new hole in the floor?
I think actually Rick probably has
Oh, sure.
on
Yes,
that.
it was a simple cutting into concrete, which is, for some people, it's not a hard thing to do. And the floor, concrete, the gallery floor is about 6 inches of concrete that they had to cut through, which is pretty thick, as it should be, right? And then this, the sewer shaft and grate kind of fits into that hole. And the shaft itself, it's an illusion. It's actually only about 30 inches deep. So then the suitcase gets set on top of that.
Great. Thank you, Rick. While we're down with you, I wonder, there's a couple more questions about mechanics. So do the motor and mechanical pieces create heat? And if so, is that a problem to work around?
Well, that's a good question. Between the canned lights here and the little motor, it does heat up. But the water itself is pretty cool, so it tends to balance out quite a bit. When you're up here with the door closed, which we do immediately when we come up, normally it's pretty comfortable. It doesn't get real hot, but you think it would. But again, there's a lot of water up here, and it comes straight from the tap, and so it really regulates the temperature.
Great. And one more about your conservation routines. How much time does it take to clean the pool?
What do you think, Terry? That's the first time we we did it. It took a while to get the, it's really a tight space for two people up there moving around. It takes a little choreographing. And it took pretty much, I don't know, Terri, what was it?
Yeah, I mean, it takes probably about a half a day, and we're doing it maybe every 3 to 4 months in order to keep that water quality nice and clear. I mean, what we do is Rick showed you the siphon, the submersible pump. We pump it out, we scrub it out, we rinse it, we pump the water out again, and then we refill it. So it's a very heavy duty maintenance routine.
Great. So many comments, lovely comments of praise, how much people have enjoyed this tour, but we do have a few more questions. So a couple related to the sculpture itself. So we know the adult legs are the artist's. Do we know if the child's legs were modeled after his child or anyone else in particular?
No, we don't. So my guess, if you've ever seen how difficult it is to get a baby to sit still long enough to take a leg casting, is that was probably modeled in clay and then cast. I am guessing, this is a complete guess, that is not from an actual cast of a baby's legs.
Great, thank you. I know we have a few docents on the call, and so one of our docents asks that it's great to show pictures on tours, if that's something that we might be able to get a few of these pictures to share on tours, and I can certainly follow up with you on that. And then also, and I didn't realize this is happening, but as docents, we sometimes tell students that the piece has an alarm on it as an extra deterrence to touching. Is this true?
This is true.
Ah.
Yes, there is an audible alarm that if people come too close, that audible alarm will go off. So yeah, that is one of the measures that we took, because we didn't want to stanchion the work. We didn't want to put it on a platform or a pedestal, because it's really meant to sit right on the floor, but yet at the same time, we wanted to try to provide some protection.
Great. Thank you. And another question, has Gober made any other works of art that require this degree of attention and care?
Very good question. Well, we do know about the one that is similar to ours, that's in Switzerland. But I think the complexity of our work and the work at the Schaulager is somewhat different than the rest of his work. Somewhat more complicated.
Thank you. So, there's just some really beautiful comments. And I think, both of you were talking about not wanting to we want to give this behind the scenes information, but not ruin the magic of the piece for people. And some people have made some really nice comments to that, about that it makes us appreciate it even more. And that just how detailed it is and what goes into it, appreciation for the work that happens behind the scenes, of course, and that we don't get to see. So lots of bravos for that. Sarah asks, has anyone from the Switzerland Museum come to see our artwork or vice versa?
No, I can tell you that I would love to go and take a tour behind the scenes of their sculpture and see that reverse osmosis filtration system and see that plumbing that they've set up. But that hasn't happened as of yet. We're just basically corresponding via email at this point.
Great. And I have a question myself, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but do we know when we might see the piece out on view again?
Well, I can't tell you a for sure date. So phase one, we've sort of divided up this conservation project into phases. Phase one is going to be getting the seaweed refabricated, which is really important, and doing the touch-up so that the pool can be filled up with water again. Phase two is going to involve doing some work on the legs and possibly also tweaking the light track. But talking with Margaret, I'm hoping that 2022 is going to be the point where we'll be able to get it back out on view.
Great. Thank you. And what is the name of, Jill is wondering, what's the name of the Swiss Museum again?
It is the Schaulager Museum, and it's in Basel, Switzerland. Are you planning to go? Take me along.
I was going to say we should all do a group trip now. Yeah, Kathy says, many thanks to MAM's conservator staff. You are rock stars. And I love Marley's comment too. You provided all of us with an amazing insider's view of this incredible piece. We will even have more wonder when we see it. So you've increased our sense of wonder rather than detracted. Oh, Kathleen adds, there's a huge Gober installation of sinks at the Glenstone Museum. Although the faucets run water and the scale is monumental, nothing compares to the complexity of our piece. I'm not familiar with that, but that's great to know, something to look up. I remember that I've been here long enough to remember the old days, the previous installation, when you did hear the water running down in the lower level. And it could be disconcerting for visitors because most people want to alert you when they hear running water in galleries. And I would get that comment from visitors, like, do you need to check the pipes? So yeah, the new setup is fantastic. Oh, Marley also asked, how did we acquire this piece?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had all the details. I know that Margaret Andera was the curator behind acquiring it. I know that we acquired it in 1999, 2 years after it was fabricated by the artist. And the other thing I know that it was in an exhibition, I think it was like a retrospective exhibition of the artist's works in Los Angeles. And I believe the sculpture was purchased out of that exhibition. But those are the only details I know of how we acquired this piece.
Great. Yeah, I think that sounds pretty much like what I remember as well from Margaret Andera. So Kathy asked, where was the previous location at MAM? Which is interesting to sort of put I have to think myself, like what sits there now in the location it used to be.
Right, it was on the east end, and I believe this is prior to the construction where we added to the east end. So it was in the sort of southeast corner of the main level of the museum.
So where the design galleries are now, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. So we didn't put a plaque in the floor that it said Gober's Untitled was here. So great. I think we've gone through most of the questions. I'll make sure I didn't miss anything. Really, everyone is so complimentary of both of your insights into the work. And it's one of the benefits of this online virtual format. I don't know that we would have thought to have done this if we hadn't suddenly been doing things by Zoom, and this, was really fantastic. So and I also have to say a personal thank you for showing some of the stuff that shows up in the suitcase. We've had some fun stories from school tours of things that were tragically lost in the suitcase, and some were recovered. But yeah, so we've revealed all the secrets now. There's full disclosure. Cell phones, I don't know if we've had.
Yes, cell phones.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, you've set the bar very high. Now the requests are coming in for more talks. We'd love to see more from the conservation team, more of these types of adventures in the future. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think we can probably turn back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you so much, Terry and Rick and Pedro. What an incredible, fun adventure. You put it really well, Amy. And thank you so much to all of you. I hope this gives you insight and a little more understanding into just what your membership support really makes possible at the museum. As you can see, there's so much work that goes into conserving this artwork and the 30,000 other artworks that are in our care. So thank you so much again to all of you for your support. And once again, thank you, Terry, Rick, and Pedro. Such a fun adventure. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all in person this summer at the museum and again for future virtual events. Thank you all.